My parents invited me to dinner after years of silence. I didn't even finish dessert when they demanded I bail my brother out troubles. So I said I know this is going to happen and refused to do anything. If there's one thing I learned growing up, it's that being the second kid in my family meant being the second option for everything. My brother Nate, 33, since the day he popped out, my parents acted like he was carved out of gold. I'm not saying Nate's a terrible person. He's just the golden boy. You know the type. Walks into a room and somehow everyone's clapping for him. Even if he just tied his shoes. That was my life in comparison. Nate gets the spotlight. I get the scraps. Let me give you some examples so you know I'm not just salty. When Nate graduated high school, my parents threw him this huge backyard party, catered food balloons. Everyone in the neighborhood was invited. He got a brand new car with a big red bow on top right in front of everyone. When I graduated 3 years later, I got a congrats Carl cake from Walmart and an envelope with $20 inside. That's it, $20. I'm not exaggerating. Christmases were the same. Nate unwrapped an Xbox designer clothes or the latest phone. I'd get socks and I hope you use them well. Like, gee, thanks, Mom. I'll treasure these ankle socks forever. And it wasn't just gifts. It was attention. Nate played football and they never missed a single game. I did science fairs, debate competitions, even made it to state once. And I can't remember them being there. They'd always have some excuse. Dad had a meeting. Mom wasn't feeling well. But if Nate had a practice game, they'd be in the front row with noisemakers. It's not like I didn't try. I was the kid who thought if I just worked harder, they'd finally notice. Straight A's didn't matter. Part-time job in high school to pay for my own stuff. Barely got a good job. Meanwhile, Nate got a round of applause for mowing the lawn without being asked. The difference followed us into adulthood too. Nate graduated, and my parents immediately bragged to everyone about his potential. He got a cushy job because a family friend pulled strings, and they treated it like he climbed Everest. When I started my own path, crickets, they didn't even ask how I was doing half the time. One time I overheard my mom on the phone with a relative bragging about Nate's promotion. She said, "Oh, Carl's still doing his little computer thing." Little computer thing. I had been busting my ass building a legit business. And to her, it was some hobby I did in my pajamas. The part that really set the tone for our relationship, though, was money. Not theirs, mine. I always ended up being the quiet safety net. When Nate needed help with rent back in his early 20s, guess who spotted him? Me. He promised he'd pay it back. Spoiler, he never did. When my parents had a surprise property tax bill, I covered it. When the furnace broke in winter, I venomed them the money. Never once did they ask if I was doing okay if I could afford it. They just assumed I'd step in, and I did, because back then I thought maybe helping would make me part of the family team. But the respect never came. They'd still beam at Nate like he was the only one keeping the family name afloat. Growing up in that shadow taught me two things. One, favoritism doesn't fade as you get older. And two, if you want to stand out, you can't wait for anyone to hand it to you. So while Nate was coasting on family handouts and networking opportunities, I built my own lane. I didn't ask them for a dime. I didn't need them to clap for me. I kept my head down, worked jobs, learned coding, teamed up with a couple friends, and built something from scratch. They didn't show up. They didn't even ask questions. But that's fine. Their silence just made me sharper. And I know how this probably sounds like some sad soba story of the forgotten brother. That's not me. I'm not sitting here crying about socks and cheap graduation cakes. I actually think all that crap shaped me. I became tougher, smarter, and yeah, a little colder. But I needed that. If they weren't going to hand me a stage, I'd build my own. By the time I hit 30, the whole Golden Boy routine was still going strong. My parents still acted like Nate walked on water. But things had started shifting behind the scenes and none of them knew it yet. Nate thought being the favorite meant he was untouchable. My parents thought ignoring meant I'd always be the background kid. But they were wrong, because while they were clapping for him, I was quietly setting up the one play they'd never see coming. It started when I was 19. Most kids my age were worried about frat parties or passing classes. Me, I was in a cramped dorm room with two other guys who had the same chip on their shoulders that I did. We weren't the type who had internships lined up through family connections. We were the broke kids with secondhand laptops running on vending machine food and caffeine. The three of us hit it off in a computer science class. They were good. I was better at pulling all the loose pieces together. One night after class, we started talking about how every company was scrambling for security software, but hated paying big firms for bloated products. We thought, why not build something lean, something affordable, something we could actually sell? That night, in a greasy pizza place, the idea for our licensing company was born. We called it Small, Simple, Nothing Flashy. It wasn't some Silicon Valley dream with a mascot or a colorful logo. It was just us writing code until our eyes burned. I remember nights where I'd look at the clock, realize it was 4 a.m., and still keep going because if I stopped, we'd fall behind. Rent was a constant stress. I worked side gigs, fixing people's busted desktops, tutoring high school kids, even helping professors set up their slideshows for extra cash. Every dollar went into keeping the servers running and paying the bills. The first year, nobody cared. We pitched hospitals, law offices, even schools. Most said no, some laughed. A few tried to haggle us down to pennies. We got used to rejection, but we didn't quit. By year 2, we finally got our first real break. A local clinic bought a license for our system. It wasn't much, barely covered 2 months of expenses, but it was proof someone was willing to pay for our work. That small yes kept us alive. The growth snowballed after that. One hospital turned into 5. A credit union referred us to another. Soon we had government agencies calling us up. They wanted licensing for secure data protocols. Exactly what we built. We weren't flashy, but we were reliable. That mattered. Meanwhile, back home, my parents didn't ask a single thing. Not once. I'd call to check in and it was always the same. Nate's doing great at work. He's up for another promotion. Or we're so proud of Nate, he's really carrying the family name. If I tried to mention what I was working on, it was brushed aside like small talk. To them, I was still doing computer stuff. That's what my mom called it once. Carl's little computer projects. Little projects that were now keeping federal systems locked down. By year 5, we were drowning in contracts. And that's when the big boys started circling. A defense contractor reached out asking for a meeting. At first, we thought it was a prank. Why would a multi-billion-dollar firm care about us? But it was real. They wanted our patents, our licensing, and our brains off the market. Negotiations dragged on for months. Lawyers, accountants, endless video calls where I had to pretend I wasn't still sitting in a crappy apartment with peeling paint. They came back with an offer we couldn't ignore. Millions for the buyout plus royalties from every license they sold using our tech. When I signed my name on that deal, my hands shook. Not out of fear, but because everything we fought for, the sleepless nights, the rejections, the ramen dinners, it all added up to this. My cut was $3 million flat plus royalties. The bank transfer hit my account, and I stared at the number like it was fake. I went from calculating if I could afford gas to knowing I'd never have to worry about bills again. And still, my parents didn't know. They never asked. Around that same time, they mailed me a birthday card. The same routine. Cheap card, no call, no gift. Just one line scribbled inside. Maybe one day you'll make us proud. So while they clapped for Nate, I stayed quiet. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means patient. And I had been patient for long enough. So after years of being the background kid, I didn't expect much from my parents. So when my mom called and said, "Carl, it's been too long. Let's do a family dinner, just us," I actually paused for a minute. I thought maybe they meant it. Maybe they'd finally decided to just sit down, talk like adults, and reconnect without Nate being the center of gravity. I wanted to believe it. But the thing about growing up in my house, you learn to read patterns. And the pattern was always the same. Sudden attention meant someone wanted something. The truth landed in my lap a few days later, and not from them. I got a call from a bank contact. The guy had worked with me before on setting up accounts for the company buyout, so we knew each other well enough that he didn't talk to me like a stranger. He said my name was showing as the proposed guarantor on a follow-on application. Nate had opened off that lien and wanted to confirm it wasn't a mistake. I had no clue what he was talking about. He sent over the paperwork. That's when I saw it. Nate's name all over a massive loan application. And the kicker, he had put my parents' house down as collateral. Their actual house, the place they lived in, the one with the leaning mailbox and the flickering porch light. A few months earlier, he'd slit a rate drop refinance packet in front of them and called it routine. They signed where the little sticky tabs told them to sign. Buried in that packet was a second lien, basically a home equity add-on he planned to draw against. And my name was flagged because the bank assumed I'd be the logical safety net if anything went south. Not mom, not dad. Me. I sat there looking at the document, and it was like everything lined up at once. The sudden warm phone call, the fancy we should reconnect dinner invitation, Nate's name tied up in debt he couldn't handle. It wasn't about mending things. It was about dragging me into his mess. That's when the switch flipped for me. I didn't even feel angry at first. It was more like, of course, this is exactly how it would go. Nate plays with fire. My parents cover for him. And when it gets too hot, they remember I exist. And not because they care, because I can be useful. I didn't say a word to them. When Mom called again to confirm, I kept my voice calm. "Yeah, I'll be there." She sounded almost relieved, like she thought she'd reeled me in. She said things like, "We miss you, Carl. It'll be so good to catch up." I smiled on the phone, gave her the same polite tone I used in board meetings, and hung up. But inside, I was already planning. I printed out the loan documents, highlighted the parts that mattered, and stuck them in a folder. Not because I wanted to throw it in their faces immediately, but because I wasn't walking into that house unarmed. I'd played that role too many times. The kids sitting at the table with nothing but a smile while everyone else talked over him. Not this time. What made it almost funny, was how hard they leaned into their reconnect angle. Mom left me a voicemail about making my favorite meal. Dad sent a text about how family is all we really have. Even Nate shot me a one-liner. Don't be late? He didn't even say please. That's the level of entitlement he was operating at, already assuming I'd show up to bail him out. I kept every message, every voicemail, every text receipts, just like the ones I'd been collecting for years. By the time the day came, I wasn't walking in as the quiet backup anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their approval or sit there swallowing jokes at my expense. This dinner wasn't about reconnecting. It was about exposure, about watching their faces when they realized I'd already seen behind the curtain. So when I pulled into the driveway that night, folder in the passenger seat, the house glowing like nothing was wrong, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even bitter. I was ready, because for once in my life, I wasn't stepping into their house as the overlooked son. I was stepping in as the one holding all the cards. The porch light flickered as I walked up the steps. Some things never changed. I rang the bell even though I could hear voices inside. Mom opened the door fast like she'd been waiting behind it. She smiled big, pulled me into a hug and said, "Carl, you didn't have to ring. Just come in." The smell of roast chicken and herbs hit me as I stepped inside. The dining table was already set with the special dishes they only dusted off for holidays. Candles, matching napkins, wine glasses, even though they rarely went this far when I was a kid. For a second it felt staged like a magazine spread. I kept my face neutral and said, "Looks nice." Dad came in from the kitchen holding a carving knife. He gave me a handshake firm like he wanted to show strength. "Glad you made it, son." His tone was measured, not casual like he was running lines from a script. We sat down in the living room for small talk while we waited on Nate. Mom asked about the drive to the city if I still liked my apartment. I kept my answers short, steady. "Yeah, it's good. The drive was fine. Work keeps me busy." I let them steer. If they wanted me relaxed, I'd give them relaxed. After about 20 minutes, the front door opened. Keys hit the counter, footsteps heavy. Then Nate appeared, all charm. He wore a fitted jacket, no-tie hairstyle like he had walked out of an ad. Well, he said, grinning. "Look who decided to show up." He gave Mom a kiss on the cheek, fist-bumped Dad, and nodded at me like I was just another guest. "Good to see you too," I said evenly. We moved to the dining table. Plates were full before I'd even picked up my fork. Mom was buzzing, telling stories about neighbors and family friends. Dad added in small pieces about work, the stock market, his golf game. All surface talk, nothing personal. I ate, listened, and let the silence fill in between their words. Nate leaned back in his chair, cracking jokes like always. "So Carl, you still glued to a computer screen doing your little tech thing?" He said it casually, but I caught the smirk. The same tone he'd used for years, downplaying anything I did. I chewed, swallowed, and said, "Yeah? Turns out people still need computers. Pays the bills." Then I smiled just enough to let him know it didn't land. Dad chuckled like he didn't want the mood to dip. "Your brother's just teasing." "Yeah, I know," I said. "I can handle a joke." The conversation kept circling back to family, though. Mom talked about how important it was that we all stay close. Dad added, "These are the years where we need to lean on each other more." They exchanged glances when they said it, subtle but not invisible. I nodded along. Sure, family's important. They seemed encouraged by that, and Mom's voice grew softer, almost rehearsed. "We've been thinking how nice it would be to start fresh. Put the past behind us." "Past is past," I said, picking up another piece of chicken. "I'm here now." That line seemed to settle her. She smiled like she'd landed something. But the more they tried, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a casual dinner. This was build-up. Every story, every compliment, every "we're so proud of you now" was leading somewhere. They weren't reconnecting. They were prepping me. Nate finally leaned forward, elbows on the table, and cleared his throat. "You know, Carl, you've done well for yourself. And honestly, it's good timing. There are some things happening that you could be useful with." The air shifted a little when he said that. Dad took a sip of water. Mom adjusted her napkin. It wasn't subtle. I raised an eyebrow. Useful how Nate shrugged like it was no big deal. "Just opportunity stuff where family helps family. You know you'll hear more soon, but I'm glad you came tonight. Perfect timing." Mom nodded, backing him up. "We're stronger when we support each other." I set my fork down and leaned back in my chair. "I agree, but support goes both ways." That made Dad shift in his seat. He glanced at Nate, then back at me. "We'll get into it. Tonight's about being together first." I smiled. "Then, let's enjoy dinner." And that's how it went. They pushed the family angle harder than they ever had in my life, dropping little hints about sticking together and looking out for one another. I played along, cool, calm, giving them nothing they could twist. But inside, I already knew where this was going. I'd seen the loan papers. I knew about the house. I knew Nate wasn't talking about opportunity. He was talking about saving himself. So I let them talk. Let them believe I was still the quiet son waiting to be included. Because the longer they stuck to their script, the more satisfying it was going to be when I flipped mine. The chicken was half gone when Nate finally dropped the act. He leaned forward, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked at me like he was about to deliver a big favor. "Carl," he said, voice steady, "I'll be straight with you. There's something I need help with. Nothing crazy, just co-signing on a loan. It's a formality. You've got the credit. You've got the stability. Won't even affect you, but it would mean a lot for me and for Mom and Dad." There it was. Not even a warm-up. He just tossed it out like he expected me to nod and sign tomorrow. Mom chimed in instantly. It's just paperwork, sweetheart. Families do this for each other. Dad gave me that measured look again. It's not a big risk. Your brother just needs the backing. We know you can provide that. I sat back, folded my hands, and let a grin creep in. Not a big one, just enough to make them uncomfortable. Interesting, I said. So this dinner wasn't really about reconnecting. It was about making me the safety net again. Nate raised his hands like I was overreacting. Come on, don't be dramatic. It's not like that. This is opportunity. You'd barely notice it. I reached down, slid the folder from beside my chair, and set it on the table hard. The sound made Mom flinch. Funny thing, I said, tapping the cover. The bank already sent me these. Turns out I was flagged as a potential guarantor without anyone asking me. Imagine my surprise when I see Nate's name all over it. The room went stiff. Dad froze. Fork midair. Mom's smile vanished. Nate blinked fast, then forced a laugh. That's probably just a standard thing. They reach out to relatives sometimes. I cut him off. Number not standard. You turn this house into collateral by sliding rate reduction papers in front of them and letting them sign without reading. And you're behind on payments. I saw the notice. Silence. Heavy, thick silence. Mom shook her head slowly. Nate, is that true? He shifted in his chair, eyes darting between us. It's temporary. I've got plans in motion. Carl's making it sound worse than it is. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, my voice calm but sharp. Worse than it is. You risked their home. You gambled with the roof over their heads. And then you thought I'd just walk in blind and sign my name to your mess like I've been doing my whole life, quietly cleaning up after you. Nate's smugness cracked. Don't act like you're some hero. You've got money now. Great. Good for you. But family steps up when it matters. Family, I shot back. Family steps up. Sure. But real family doesn't hide foreclosure notices and lie to their parents. Real family doesn't use them like poker chips. Dad finally spoke, voice low. Nate, you put the house on the line. You said it was a routine refinance. I signed where you marked. I didn't realize it added a second mortgage against the house. Nate looked down at his plate. I had no choice. I slammed my palm on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. You always had a choice. You just never cared about the cost because someone else was always there to cover it. Mom's eyes were wet now, her hands twisted in her lap. Carl, please, maybe we can figure something out. No, I said sharply. Not this time. You've spent my whole life telling me I had to earn respect, earn love, earn a place at this table. Meanwhile, Nate could burn the house down and you'd still hand him a match. You don't get to put this on me now. Nate's voice rose defensive. Don't talk like you're perfect. You think money makes you better than us? I laughed once. Cold. Better number. Smarter. Absolutely. I didn't come here to beg for approval. I came here because I'm done being your silent backup. You used to call me the overlooked son. Tonight, I'm the one holding the cards. I opened the folder and slid the documents across the table. This is the loan. This is the collateral. And this, I pulled out the notice of default, the pre-foreclosure letter. Bold letters across the top is where this ends. You've been exposed. Dad looked older in that moment than I'd ever seen him. He rubbed his temples and muttered, "How could you do this?" Nate? Nate leaned back, jaw tight, and tried to spin it. It was an investment. It'll pay off if we give it time. I pointed at him. That's your problem. You think time erases stupidity? It doesn't. And I'm not here to be your parachute. Mom reached for my hand across the table. Carl, please. You're brothers. You can't tear each other apart like this. I pulled my hand back. He did that himself. I'm just making sure I don't get dragged down with him. Nate glared at me, voice low and bitter. You're ruining me. No, I said, locking eyes with him. You ruined yourself the second you thought no one would hold you accountable. I'm just the one refusing to play dumb. The room went dead quiet again. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Dad stared at the documents like the pages might explain everything. Mom looked between us, torn between defending her golden boy and realizing the truth was staring her in the face. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. I didn't come here to sign anything. I didn't come here to play along. I came here to put an end to the script. You don't get to rewrite the story, so Nate looks like the hero, and I'm the side character. Not anymore. Nate clenched his fists. So what now? You walk away. I gave him a small smile. Not yet. First, you get to sit in the mess you made, and when the bank comes knocking, you can explain why you thought you were untouchable. But me? I'm done carrying your weight. I grabbed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and stood tall. Dinner's over. That line hit harder than I thought it would. You could feel the room freeze. Nate just leaned back in his chair, arms folded, doing that fake laugh he always used when he felt cornered. Come on, Carl, he said. You've always had a flair for dramatics, but this ending dinner early. Real tough guy move. I tilted my head, calm as ever. This isn't dramatics. This is reality. And reality is about to smash through this house, whether you like it or not. He smirked, shaking his head. You think you're the only one who knows how things work? I've got this under control. You don't just lose a house overnight. It takes months. I'll refinance, restructure, whatever it takes. Stop acting like you've caught me in some grand scandal. I dropped the folder onto the table right in front of Dad. It slid across the wood with a slap that made everyone jump. Go ahead and open it, I said. You'll see the notices, the signatures, and the dates. That's not some rumor. That's proof. And unless Nate's hiding money in a vault somewhere, the bank owns him. And by extension, they own you. Dad's hand hovered over the folder like it might bite him. He finally flipped it open, and I watched his face change. His jaw tightened, his brow furrowed, and then he looked at Nate. For the first time in my life, I saw disappointment aimed at him instead of me. "Nathan," he said, voice sharp. "What the hell did you do?" Nate raised his chin like a kid caught sneaking out. "It's not what it looks like. It's leverage. Temporary risk for long-term gain. You wouldn't understand." "Stop," I cut in, stepping closer. "This isn't strategy. This is you gambling with other people's safety." Same story it's always been, except this time I'm not playing cleanup crew. Mom finally found her voice soft but trembling. "Carl, please, we're a family. If we work together..." I spun toward her sharp but calm. "Family don't rewrite history now. When I called from my apartment years ago because I couldn't afford groceries, where was that family support? When Nate wrecked my car and you told me to let it go because he was going through a tough time, where was the family card? You don't get to pull it out now that the walls are closing in." Her lips pressed tight. Tears welled up, but I wasn't moved. I'd fallen for that before. Nate shoved his chair back, standing like he wanted to go chest to chest. "You think you're better than me because you've got money now? That makes you smug. Carl, you think you're untouchable." I didn't flinch. "Number. What makes me untouchable is that I stopped needing your approval years ago. I don't need you. I don't need them. And I sure as hell don't need to tie my future to your mistakes," he sneered. "You'll regret this. When they lose the house, when Mom and Dad are out on the street, it'll be on you." I actually laughed. Not loud, just a short, sharp sound that made him flinch more than if I'd shouted. "No, Nate. That'll be on the guy whose signature is on every page in that folder. You wanted the spotlight? You got it." Dad rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. "How could you be so reckless?" His voice cracked. "With our home." I let that moment sit. For once, they weren't grilling me. For once, Nate had to squirm under the weight of his own choices. I leaned forward, palms on the table, meeting each of them in the eye. "Here's what's going to happen. The bank is going to expect their payments. When you can't deliver, they'll make their move. Maybe they give you a grace period. Maybe they don't. But it's out of my hands. I'm not bailing you out. Not with a dime. Not with my name. Not with anything." Mom's tears spilled, her voice breaking. "Carl, please. You can't just stand there and do nothing. You've always been the strong one. You can help us." I stood straight, jaw set. "Number, you don't get to guilt me with that anymore. You made your choice every time you ignored me. Every time you chose Nate over me, you raised him to believe there would always be a safety net. Well, congratulations. You raised a man who thinks consequences don't apply to him. And tonight, you're all finding out that they do." Dad spoke again, softer this time, almost resigned. "Carl, you can't mean it. You'd let us lose everything." I looked at him, dead serious. "You already did. You lost me years ago. You just never noticed." The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward, deadly. A silence where the truth had finally been spoken out loud, and no one could take it back. I grabbed the folder, tucked it under my arm again, and stepped back. "I'm done here. Enjoy your dinner." My footsteps echoed across the tile as I headed for the door. Nobody tried to stop me. Mom cried quietly into her napkin. Dad sat staring at the papers like they were written in a language he couldn't understand. Nate stood, rigid fists, still clenched, face red. At the door I paused and looked back one last time. "You always said I wasn't enough. Turns out I was too much for you, too much to ignore, too much to control, and now I'm gone." I walked out into the night. The cool air felt cleaner than it ever had inside that house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. The house glowed behind me, warm and inviting on the outside, but I knew better. Inside, the cracks had finally shown. Nate wasn't untouchable anymore, and they all knew it. As I drove away, I didn't feel regret or doubt, just freedom. For once, I wasn't cleaning up the mess. This time, the fallout would fall exactly where it belonged, and I'd be miles away watching it happen from a distance. When the foreclosure listing finally went live, I didn't hear it from them. A buddy of mine in real estate sent me the link. Their house, the one they guarded like a crown jewel, plastered on a website for anyone to click through. Pictures of the living room, the backyard, the kitchen where my mom once said, "This family only works when Nate leads." Now it was just another property up for grabs. Price negotiable. Contact agent for viewing. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just stared at it for a second and thought, well, you earned this one. Then I shut the tab and went back to work. That's the thing about fallout. It doesn't explode all at once. It creeps. It builds. It rots slow, and then suddenly, the roof caves in. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing. First my mom, then my dad, a few missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Then Nate himself leaving a voicemail where he tried to sound calm, but his voice cracked halfway through. "Carl, listen. We need to talk, man. There's some things going on and we could use your help. You know, family sticks together." Family? That was funny. For years, family meant I was the audience while Nate got the spotlight. Now family apparently meant I was their emergency parachute. Too bad I'd already cut the strings. I ignored the calls. I didn't owe them an explanation, and I wasn't about to waste breath just to hear them twist it into something else. But they didn't stop. The next week, they showed up at my apartment, I came back from work, and there they were, Mom, Dad, and Nate, standing at the door like some busted sales team. Nate had his hands stuffed in his pockets. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes, and Mom tried hers. Smile that always felt rehearsed. Carl, she started like she hadn't been ignoring me most of my life. We just want to talk. I leaned on the doorframe. Talk about what? The open house. You want me to put in an offer? Her face dropped quick. She wasn't ready for jokes. Dad finally spoke. We know you've always been smart with money. You probably saw the notice. Things got complicated, but we can get through this. Together, together. That word again. Where was together when I was busting my ass alone? Where was together when Nate was draining them dry and they called him the golden son? I shook my head. Nah, you three made your moves. You clapped when Nate pitched his big ideas. You ignored the cracks, and you rolled your eyes when I called things out. Now it's not my mess to sweep. Nate stepped forward like he was going to sell me on something. Look, man, it's not even that bad. If we pull resources, we can stop. I cut him off. You don't get it, do you? This is the end of the line. No bailouts, no cosigns, no safety nets. You played the game thinking someone else would pay when you lost. Well, guess what? You lost. Pay up. The silence after that was thick. Mom's eyes watered. Dad's jaw tightened. And Nate just stood there like, maybe if he stayed quiet long enough, I'd cave. I didn't. I closed the door. Simple as that. The fallout didn't stop at the house. Word spread. Small-town gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi. Neighbors knew. Co-workers knew. Even old family friends knew. Nate went from the entrepreneur to the guy who tanked his parents' house. Dad had to retire early. Once people at work heard he'd signed a rate reduction packet he didn't read, no one wanted him near approvals. No one trusts a guy like that to manage anything. Mom, she kept trying to spin it, telling people it was the bank's fault or that the economy was tough, but everyone knew the truth. Everyone had seen them treat me like a shadow while they bragged about Nate. Now the shadow was the one walking free, and they were stuck living in it. I wasn't gloating. I didn't need to. Reality was already doing the work for me. I just kept living, kept working, kept building, kept moving forward. Every time I passed their old neighborhood and saw the for sale sign, it reminded me I didn't burn that house down. They did. All I did was stop running in with buckets of water every time they lit another match. Weeks later, Nate tried one more time. He found me at the gym of all places. Came up while I was mid-set like I was supposed to pause and give him an audience. I racked the weights, wiped my hands, and waited. Carl, I messed up. He admitted, which was probably the closest thing to honesty I'd ever hear from him. But you can't just leave Mom and Dad hanging. They're losing everything. I stared at him. And you care because he blinked. Because they're our parents. Our parents, I repeated. Funny. When they had something to give, they were your parents. Your biggest fans. Now they're broke, and suddenly they're ours. Convenient timing. He opened his mouth, but I stepped closer. Listen, Nate. You built your life on shortcuts and handouts. You gambled with stuff you didn't own, and you thought someone else would clean it up. I'm not someone else. I'm me, and I'm done carrying your dead weight. For once, he didn't have a comeback. He just nodded like maybe he finally realized the ride was over. Then he walked out, shoulders slumped, the golden boy with nothing left to shine.